Hey dog jockeys, today I'm coming to you from the lab, the control room of our studio here, and we're going to talk a little bit about analog versus digital and then what an analog hybrid is. So, analog setups are kind of what you see back in the day. That's how I started as an engineer. As an assistant engineer, I started on an MCI 2-inch or Sony MCI 2-inch tape, reel to reel, 24 track, with an SSL 4000 board. And for a while, we had a Neotech Elite board, which was kind of like a Neve, a poor man's Neve, so to speak. And so that was back in the day how things were recorded. You would go through an analog board, just like this one here, which this board is made by Malcolm Toft, Toft Audio, and he's the designer of the Trident 80. So basically this is a Trident 80 board, but with a few new features to make it DAW friendly. So the way it would work was your instruments would go into your analog board and they would go out to a tape machine, whether it be a 2-inch 16-track tape machine, and the 2-inch I'm referring to is the width of the tape, those big reels you would see. Now, most studios in the 80s and 90s were using 2-inch reel-to-reel 24-track machines. You even had some who would use a 48-track setup where they would take two of the tape machines and they would link them together where they would do what they call striping SMPTE on one channel of the tape machine, so that the two tape machines would link up then. And SMPTE, or SMPTE, is a time code that used to be used quite a bit. It was invented by the Society of Motion Pictures and Television Engineers. That's where the name SMPTE comes from. And so that was a way to link up audio to video, and then engineers started using it in the studio to link up MIDI devices to it as well. Or they would link up 2-inch tape machines together to make sure that they were synchronized and they were able to record everything and keep those tapes linked together. Now, if you ever had to link up SMPTE with MIDI machines in the analog world, let me tell you, it was a beating. Me and the engineer that I worked under as an intern, we went through quite a few headaches. And usually when people came in with keyboards, he would just kind of grab his head and be like, okay, it's going to be one of those days. But these days, super easy because of digital. Now, what's the difference between purely analog and purely digital, or what you hear people reference in the box? Well, see this right here, this device is an Antelope Orion 32. It takes my 32 analog channels or signals coming from different instruments, microphones, things like that, and routes them through this box and turns them into digital signals, which then go into Pro Tools, which is my DAW of choice. Now you can use it with Reaper, you can use it with Harrison Mix Bus, the Persona Studio One. You know, there's so many different ones out there. Cubase by Steinberg. There's a ton of DAWs. And people always ask me, which DAW do you prefer? The one you know. I'm on Pro Tools. I've been on Pro Tools for almost 20 years. So Pro Tools is the one I know. Pro Tools is the one I know very well. But the difference is I use a hybrid approach. See, a lot of the newer engineers are completely in the box. And so things like Reaper or things like Harrison Mix Bus or Studio One, they work great for them because they're able to learn how they work and they mix everything completely in the box. Now, by in the box, I mean that once it goes through, once a signal, an instrument, a microphone, a direct input, a DI, goes through this box, their digital interface, and it's converted to digital, that file never touches analog again because it goes into their DAW, they mix it, then they bounce it down as a digital file, either a WAV or an MP3 or both. And so the audience then consumes those files, generally as digital now. So the guys that are in the box, once it's out of the analog world, it never sees analog again. Now the guys that are purely analog, which you really don't see much anymore because tape machines really haven't been made for about 20 years now. Studer made the A80 800 series. They made some great tape machines, 24 track. In the 70s, they had the 16 tracks. Sony made a bunch of great tape machines, but they don't really make them anymore. And nowadays, it's getting nearly impossible to find parts for them. So you have groups on the internet, like on Facebook or forums, where they'll get together and they'll let each other know about where to find this part or where to find heads, and they'll talk about calibration and things like that. Things that we in the digital world no longer have to deal with. So what's a hybrid though? Because see, I run a hybrid. I came up as an intern in a studio where we had a Neotech Elite board, which is like a poor man's Neve basically. And then we later upgraded to an SSL 4000 series. I think it was a G Plus 4056, a 56 channel SSL solid state logic 4000 series board. And all analog board. We also had a 24 track 2-inch reel to reel Sony MCI tape machine. And we had just gotten in the Tascam DA88s. We had those set up. That was our first foray into digital. And then it started getting into DAWs and computers, and it started going more and more computers. But see, I started in an analog world. So for me, mixing in the box, I did try it for a couple of years. And it's very difficult for me because I have a certain way I hear things. I like to hear, and if you've ever done tests of this, maybe we'll try it at some point in the future, of running all of your channels out through a summer, that they call them, an analog summing device, where it essentially runs all the tracks out through an analog device and then back into Pro Tools. You hear a world of difference. The imaging, as it's called, basically the imaging is the amount of space around the instruments becomes much larger. You can start to hear some of the delays and reverbs moving, whereas in the box 100%, I personally don't hear those things move as well as I'd like to. I don't hear the imaging as well as I'd like to. So I take a hybrid approach. What that means is my Toft console here is designed as an inline mixing console. And what that means is I have my 24 inputs coming from the tracking room over there. They go through the wall and into my wall unit behind me, or behind the board. There's 24 XLRs. I can increase that if I want, but 24 usually covers anything we're going to deal with. Then from there, they're patched into my patch bay over to the mixer. Channels 1 through 24 are coming in from the room over there, the tracking room, and my isolation booth. So what happens is they go into each channel, 1 through 24, and then each of these channels then goes directly into Pro Tools on a track. So I use Pro Tools essentially like a glorified tape machine. I know, call me old, but that's what I enjoy. That's what sounds the best to me. Reaching over and touching the knobs feels the best to me. Working with a mouse is uncomfortable for me. But the editing in digital, oh, you can't beat it. I can't tell you how much better that has been to improve the quality of recordings. The editing is amazing, and the things that we can do inside a DAW now. So once it's in the DAW and my tracks are recorded, I've got all my individual tracks, and if you'll notice up here on my Pro Tools, you don't see the pan. You don't see the ability to pan left and right. And the reason for that is because these channels go into Pro Tools and route right back out to the board. So what I have is templates created within Pro Tools that I'll import. And let's say I'm tracking a session. I know that my drums are going to generally take up 1 through 10 or 1 through 12. My bass, 13. I'm going to put guitars, 14 to 19. Vocals, 20 to 24. And then if they have synths and things like that, they're going to sit in the vocal range. Now, usually what we do is we'll record the drums along with the bass, maybe a scratch guitar and a scratch vocal. And then we start overdubbing. We'll overdub the bass if necessary, then I'll overdub guitars, then I'll overdub vocals. And so my monitors, I have 4 monitor sends because what I do is I route Pro Tools, I route my headphone monitor mixes down to these 4. I've got drums, bass, guitar, vocals, or keyboards, and then I turn those up and they go out to my monitors out in the control or the recording room, the tracking room. And so that way, the way our system is set up, we have the Furman boxes that you plug your headphones in. You can either have one stereo mix or you can control the volume of the 4 submixes from your headphones while you're recording. Now, as far as when it comes to mix down, then it gets a little different. That's when I get excited because what I do then is I take all of my tracks and I route them back out to the board. I'm going to take the drums and they're going to be routed to 1 through 10 or 1 through 12, like I mentioned. And then see, I have these buttons here. And what these buttons do is they create buses for me. Now, if you're not familiar with a bus is simply like what you would think of with kids in school. They're designed to take you from one place to another. And so what my buses do for me here is I'll take all of my drums. I have the left and right bus. If I click these buttons, they'll go directly to my blue fader, which is my main left and right output. But if I press the second button down, it takes me to bus 1 and 2, which is right here. 1, 2, my red knobs. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So my drums, I will bus to a stereo pair right here. And so when I go to control my drums, I do all my panning and everything, and then I hit 1 and 2 for all of my drums. And then now I pan my bus left and right, my group buses, and here's 1 and 2. Here's my drums. Now I can hear them through my left and right output, my main volume, or what I like to do, because I like to do something called parallel compression, or a drum crush, you may hear it called, to where you'll have the drums in the mix, but then you'll have the exact same drums on another auxiliary where you're just crushing it with a compressor or a limiter or both. And you get some really punchy sounding drums. So what I do is I take my bus 1 and 2 and I hit these tape buttons. That then routes it back to Pro Tools. So I can go into Pro Tools and I can create what's called an auxiliary. It's basically just a stereo volume that you can route wherever you want to. I'll create 2 auxiliaries for my drums. One for the regular drums, and then a second that these go into, but then on Pro Tools, I'll throw on a bus compressor on the crush track or parallel drum compression track, as I call it. And that's going to give you these huge punchy drums. And see, then you route those auxiliaries, the regular drum auxiliary and the crushed or compressed drum auxiliary, to your master bus in Pro Tools. And then that's going to come out to another pair that I'm monitoring what's going on in Pro Tools for. And I'll do that with all of my mix. So usually I'll have 31 and 32, or I might do on the 2-track return, which a lot of these analog boards will have, to where you can have 2 channels from your DAW return back into the board to listen to what's going on there. So I don't hear what's going on here, I hear what's coming out of Pro Tools. But I'm able to put compression on my kick drum, my snare drum, things like that. Then I route it to the board. It runs through my analog preamp. Then it runs through my sweepable mid EQ. Then it goes back into Pro Tools, EQ'd, balanced, panned, everything. And so that's what I call a hybrid approach, because I'm using Pro Tools, I'm using a DAW, or you could use Reaper or any DAW that you like, but then I'm using the analog warmth, the summing of the analog mixer, the analog EQs, and I can even put the drums, if I wanted to, here on 1 and 2 and on 3 and 4, and I could insert 3 and 4, I could insert an analog bus compressor if I wanted. I could do that for my parallel compression. And so a lot of times I'll route the bass right back into Pro Tools. I don't put it into a bus here. I'll run it through my EQ and then run it back to Pro Tools to an auxiliary send, like I mentioned with the drums. And then I've got my guitars right here. I'll put my keyboards here and my vocals here. And so that way what happens is I'm able to route all of these things through the board. They get that lush analog warmth that I like. They get the summing, they get the analog EQs, the preamps, and then they go right back into Pro Tools. And in Pro Tools, I have 2 drum buses, 2 drum auxiliary controls that basically control all of my drums. One not compressed, one heavily compressed, and then I mix them together. I've got my bass auxiliary, I've got my guitars auxiliary. If I wanted to do a treatment on all the guitars at once, I could on the auxiliary channel. I've got my keyboards, synths, pianos, whatever you want. And then I've got my vocals. And I can take all of those auxiliary sends, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them, the drums, well actually 6 counting 2 sets of drums, bass, guitars, synths and pianos, and vocals. And then I route those to my master bus and I'm ready to print mixes. So hopefully that makes sense, talking about an analog approach to recording, a digital approach to recording, and a hybrid analog digital approach to recording. I've found that over the years that the hybrid makes me the happiest. Which one is the right choice for you? Which one makes you the happiest? Which one gives you the sound that you're after? Which one gives you the feel you're after? Which one helps you as an artist, as a recording engineer, mixing engineer, tracking engineer, the ability to create that art? Because you have the ability to make a difference in the artist. You can get the most out of the artist. You're helping the artist get sounds. There's an art form to it. So do the one that lets you express yourself the most and gets the best sound. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense to you guys. Hope you enjoyed the video and look for more stuff coming out here from the Audio Sway Lab studio. We're going to be putting out a ton of content. Please subscribe and like the video. It helps the YouTube algorithm. I'm sure you hear a lot of people mention that. And if you guys have any questions for me, head on over to my Facebook group, Audio Sway Labs, or to the Audio Sway Labs website. Get in touch with me and I'd be glad to answer your questions. And comment below, what is your favorite type of setup? Are you completely in the box? Are you completely analog? Or a little bit of both? Or have you been wondering? So have a good day, guys, and I'll see you soon.